Okay, so you're all set. Take it away, John.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Kevin. All right. Evening, everyone. I'm John Kursky, for those who don't know me, and today I wanted to go over a common issue, at least with the teams that I worked with, which is like the gray box of death, which is the kind of broken visual with Power BI. And I want to introduce you to some techniques that my team has worked on, and we open sourced it, that you can use to hopefully make your life easier and avoid the gray box of death. And with that, just a little bit about myself. I've been working with the Microsoft BI stack for well over 10 years. I actually got into the Power BI world through Power Pivot and SharePoint. And then when Power BI got introduced, that kind of jumped over and started working on building out reports and semantic models. They were called data sets back then. And slowly but surely, as we were being successful with building out our reports, we kind of realized that as we would make changes to the semantic models, our reports became brittle. Or if we had a whole new wing of report developers or report analysts that make a minor change and then they'd call us, say, hey, the visuals are broken now, what's going on? And we were becoming I'd say victims of our own success. And I see that a lot with folks that I talk with at conferences or at meetups, that you do really good work and you build reports and semantic models, and you keep asking your customers or your clients or thing, I want more, I want more, and I want more. And as you kind of grow with the number of reports and semantic models you have to manage, it gets a little more difficult to scale. And so hopefully today, when I introduce you to some of the techniques that my teams use and we've open sourced, this will give you maybe another way to help scale and be successful. With that, a lot of my background, not only in the BI area, but I do a lot of project management as well. So always looking at ways to manage our data analytics projects better. And this was one area that we saw as a weakness, and we wanted to improve. After this, you can contact me. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I also have a blog that I write, try to post an article once a month about data ops, testing, semantic models, and Fabric. And any of the content that I'm going to show you today is accessible through these slides. I got the QR code up here. I'll put it up after that. And of course, when Kevin posts it for recording, you should be able to reference it. Any of the code that I'm going to share today is under MIT license, so you are free to bring it into your own environment. Just be aware that if you are bringing code into a work environment, you're going to be subject to their policies on bringing outside code in. And we got a small enough group here that if you have any questions, please feel free to stop me and interrupt, raise your hand. I'll try to keep an eye on the chat, but might be easier if you just speak up on the Teams chat. All right, so the agenda today, we'll cover kind of the challenge with working with Power BI, broken visuals, at least the challenge that my teams have encountered in the past. Want to then introduce you to Microsoft Playwright, which is a cool tool that's free and available for you to use. And then how do you take a tool like Microsoft Playwright to help you look at avoiding Power BI broken visuals, both locally and hopefully, if we have time, I'll show you how to do it in a more automated fashion so that you can scale even further. Okay, so Act 1, the challenge. All right, if you want to come off of mute, does anybody get a visceral reaction when they see these images? Any bad feelings? Any nightmares? Yeah, I see a couple of emotions on there. So this type of visual is one of those that show up, at least for me, and a couple of times where we're about to do a presentation in front of like somebody in the chief suite, and you pull up the report, it's looking great, you go to the next tab, or you open the next bookmark, and then one of those shows up, and you're like, oh no. And a broken visual, at least how I describe it, is one of the most overt or conspicuous way that you show your client or your customer that you don't necessarily have a foolproof or well-tested process. Uh, there's a lot of things that happen underneath the hood with data quality that might make metrics calculate a little bit differently. But if you see a broken visual, it is one of those things that you'll immediately get a phone call about, hey, this report's got a broken visual. I can't do anything with it. And what's also kind of frustrating with a lot of these broken visuals is, you open up in Power BI Desktop and there's usually a fix this button, and all it does is maybe remove some things, but it actually just makes the situation worse. I kind of liken it to the Power BI desktop experience to fix a broken visual is like going to the doctor and saying your arm hurts, and then the doctor just chops your arm off. Like that doesn't solve the problem. It just makes it worse. So one of the things that we've kind of learned is like how do we look at avoiding it? And unfortunately, before we look to automate it, we would do this. And I actually have a colleague, her job coming into the Power BI world is she would go into the workspaces in her workplace on Power BI service and manually check each page, each bookmark, each report for broken visuals. And now that might be easy if you've got one or two reports, but if you got 20 and all pages and bookmarks, that can be really tedious. And there's a good chance you're going to miss it. And then if you think about row level security, then you got to check each role, each report, each bookmark, and each page. And then let me kind of illustrate that point. And just, with RLS, if you were going to go into a semantic model and you wanted to test all the reports, what you have to do is you got to click in to security, and then you got to go to test as role, and then you'll get the screen up, and then you might want to click through the pages that you have. Now, this is one or two pages, but I know a lot of reports I work with have 5 or 6, and then a bunch of different bookmarks. And then what you may need to do is click through all the pages and then switch it, and then click Team B, and then switch through to see if those have broken visuals. And that becomes really tedious. And when you think about how many different permutations you have to check, that's a lot. And there's a good chance that you're going to miss broken visuals. On top of that, it's not always us that create the broken visuals. So some of the most easiest ways that you can create broken visuals is you rename a measure, you rename a column, you get rid of a column in a semantic model, you publish it, and it breaks the visuals. But if you work in a large enterprise environment or even a mid-size environment, we've seen these issues encountered as well that lead to broken visuals, which Power BI visuals have been disabled by your administrator. So, show of hands if you want to. How many of you are using custom visuals in the work that you do today? Yep. So it's very easy if you're not a tenant admin. Let's say the tenant administrator is like, well, okay, we're going to whitelist all the custom visuals that are allowed, and they immediately turn off custom visuals and then start only add a couple, and all of a sudden you got broken visuals. Not necessarily something you controlled, but it would have been nice to know about it. And for me, that was actually a situation where we were running just fine. And then I get a phone call about a custom visual we used that was broken, and I had no clue about it. And it was during one of their customers' presentations, and it looked bad. Another one is the visual exceeded the available resources. Maybe your visual does just fine in the capacity that you're working in the service, but between 9 and 10 in the morning, when everybody's refreshing their semantic models and they're maybe using the capacity more, you're hitting that peak that you would normally not have encountered. That's also causing the visual to break. And maybe you couldn't retrieve the data for the visual. How many of you, show of hands, are using like direct query or gateways to do work? All right, I see a couple hands there. If you have it where the SQL administrator takes down the SQL server, and all of a sudden your visuals are trying to connect to the data through the gateway, and it can't, you get a gray box of death because you can retrieve data. That's also similar. Number 4 is a very similar thing. If the gateway's down in a direct query, you might get this error that is wrapped in that gray box of death. So all this, like, these issues that can crop up. Some that are self-inflicted because you're changing the name of a column, or you're removing a column or a DAX measure. Others that the environment, maybe that you don't control, has some issues that are going to lead to broken visuals. My teams, we were looking at how can we kind of avoid having to manually check every couple hours, or at least in the morning, for broken visuals. And it just so happened we came across a tool called Microsoft Playwright. And Microsoft Playwright came into being about 2020. And this is the website. If you go to playwright.dev, Playwright is a open source tool that you can test applications with, and it is intended to help application developers. So you think of like ASP.NET, .NET Core applications that are on the website, Python, or sorry, PHP applications, anything that generates HTML, and you can go to a URL to access it. This is a website. This tool allows you to test for interactions. I don't know if anyone has worked with other tools like Selenium, very similar in terms of what its objective is, but Playwright was something that came out in 2020 that is supposed to make it easier in terms of working with applications, and they built components into Visual Studio Code that help you kind of automate the testing. And you can test it in a bunch of different browsers. So you see the first thing on their page is it supports Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and Safari. So you can test in different fashions. And they have a really strong community. You can go to the Discord channel. There is a Microsoft product manager. Her name is Debbie O'Brien. A lot of the training videos that I took to learn Playwright, she has on YouTube. She also has a Discord channel, or manages a Discord channel, and is a great resource if you're not only trying to get into Playwright, but if you're looking at how to do end-to-end application testing. I highly recommend signing up for that community. But we looked at this and said, okay, is there a way that we could leverage this to test our Power BI reports that are in the service? And after a couple cycles and trial and error, we came up with a methodology, and I'd like to introduce you to that. And for those who are interested in replicating this, this is kind of the local mode version. So you don't need any like Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions to do this. You can do this all locally on your machine. And so we tried to make sure that we could do it locally first, so that if we were in kind of a restricted environment and maybe we're allowed to run some stuff on the laptop, we could at least have a laptop running the tests once or twice a day and flag us for any errors, instead of having to wait for the phone call to come in that something's broken. And the QR code that I shared on the screen will take you to a set of instructions, which I'm going to go over at the setup process. But if you're trying to recreate what I'm showing you today, we have step-by-step instructions on how to set that up. So first things first, prerequisites. So what you will need is, in order to run Playwright, you will need Node, which is the JavaScript engine you can run locally. That is free to install. The second, and we even were talking before the meeting today about Visual Studio Code, so I know many of you are using it. You'll need Visual Studio Code as well. That's free to install. And then there's some money involved on the 3 and 4. So you will need a premium back capacity. This works in premium per user. Actually, the demo I'm going to show you is using a premium per user workspace. So you don't need a full Fabric capacity. You don't need an F2 to make this work. It will work on a Fabric capacity, but at a minimum, you just need a premium per user capacity. And the reason you're going to need that is on number 4 is you're going to need XMLA and service principals to be able to run the tests against the workspaces. And so let me show you a little bit about that setup. So I'm going to assume you've installed Node and Visual Studio Code, but let's talk a little bit about those service principals and that. So if I go to my browser here, the QR code that I shared with you takes you to this GitHub repository that has the templates and has instructions on the prerequisites. Now, one of those is creating an app service principal. And in order for the test to run in Playwright, it needs a service principal to be able to run on your behalf. So one of the first things you're going to have to make sure you have turned on in the tenant is XMLA endpoints. Now, there's a good chance that you have this enabled, but I have seen in some restricted environments, maybe you have to get into a security group in order to use it. It's just something, if you're not a tenant admin, you're definitely going to need to have this enabled. The second is you will need a service principal. And if you are in Microsoft Entra, you can create a service principal, and there is certain delegated permissions. There's no tenant level permissions that are needed, but you will need to make sure that you have these permissions at least. And the reason you need that is to allow the service principal to go to the workspace and access those APIs and access the data that's going to tell us what the data sets are, what the reports are, so that it can render the reports and test those reports. And one thing that's come up recently, working with some folks who've been installing this, is in the past, you didn't necessarily have to set up these permissions for your service principal. You just needed to add that service principal to the workspace. Unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but Microsoft has been tightening up some of their security apparatus, so much so that a lot of these endpoints are being secured through these API permissions now. So it's best practice to make sure you have those designated, and then you add the service principal to any of the workspaces that you have that you want to test. And that is as simple as making sure, if I hit back here, I go to the workspace. Oh, I need to go to manage access. You can see I've got that service principal right here. And you just need to have member rights to that workspace. And so in a lot of the environments I work in where we're running some of these tests, we'll do it in the dev test prod environments that we manage, and we can add it. And if there's anyone who maybe is building reports off our semantic models, we'll talk to them about, hey, we'd like to make sure that we're not breaking any of our reports. Would it be okay if we add this service principal, and kind of explain why we would use it? And 9 times out of 10, we usually have the admin on that workspace is fine with that, understanding why we would want to make sure that their reports are functioning just fine. So once you have the service principal, you've got those workspaces in a capacity, you made sure that you've enabled XMLA. Now is the time to set up Playwright. And you can do that just kind of following my directions here. One of the easiest ways to do it is download the template I have here. And there's a zip file. And the zip file, if you download it and unpack it, I can drag my screen over here, you'll get the zip file, you'll get a folder here that's got all the code that you'll need to be able to run the test locally. And if I was to open that up in Visual Studio Code, you'll see on the left here, we've got a whole set of information here. The first is this environment file. And this starts out as a template file here, and then you will copy it over to or rename it to env. But what you'll want to do is make sure you fill out the client ID and client secret for the service principal. Now, if you've never worked with service principals before, when you create them, the first time you're working with it is you'll create a client ID, they'll tell you what your tenant ID is, and then you will get a way to create secrets. And the first time you create it, you'll be able to copy that value. That's the client secret. And so this is what is going to authenticate to the Power BI REST APIs in order to access those workspaces. And so you'll need to keep that information here, and you don't want to share it with anybody. And then also you'll want to set your environment. I will note this, I have it default to public, but we've tested this. This runs in GCC and DoD tenants. So you just have to change it. And I give you a little table. You either change it to like US Gov or US Gov High. And the only reason you want to change that environment variable is depending on the sovereign tenants, the API endpoints are slightly different. So you'll want to make sure that it's hitting the right API tenant. And then there's effective username. So if you're doing any RLS testing and you want to make sure that it's running under certain user accounts, you can just put in a username like this, something that is a part of a group that you're doing RLS testing on. And this helps generate the test files. And speaking about test files, how do you generate those test files? Well, the easiest way to do it is you're opening up your Visual Studio Code and you've got the terminal, and the terminal can be created just by going here. I'm just going to go to the test generation folder. So all I did was change my directory, and then I am going to do an npm install, which I've already done, so it should be quicker. And then I will do an npx playwright install. So what that will do, if you haven't installed Playwright before, it will go through the process of installing the node modules in order to run Playwright, including all the browser extensions in order to run that in the browser. All right, and then we'll just run node app.js. And this will start up a little application we built where if you've got your service principal set up correctly, if I click load workspaces, what it will do is show you all the workspaces that service principal has access to. And so I'm going to click this workspace visual error testing, and then I will pick any of the reports here. And up at the top, it'll tell you what it's doing right now. So it's going to check if the report is backed by a RLS semantic model. It's going to check if it has bookmarks, and it will actually render the report on the screen. Now, one of the things that makes this testing with Playwright possible is Microsoft has a Power BI JavaScript library that lets you embed reports in other websites. And so what we're going to take advantage of here is that JavaScript SDK in order to run Playwright with this. And so when you see the report up here and I hit save test cases, what it's going to do is it's using that JavaScript SDK to run through all the tabs, all the bookmarks, and the RLS settings for that particular report and generate a CSV file. And that CSV file looks something like this, where you just have your test case, your workspace ID, the report ID, the name. This page ID is the tab, and also the data set ID and the page name. And so all this information is needed for Playwright to test. And you can create as many test cases as you want, and they all get saved into this test case folder as CSVs. And so I've got it also set up here for bookmarks. So if I got a report with bookmarks, this is going to go check the RLS settings and then check the bookmarks. And then I can save my test cases here. And so in the past, where I'd have to kind of figure out all the permutations to test, these test cases are getting built in a CSV file. And then in order to run the tests, I'm just going to open up a new terminal. And I'm going to, if this is the first time you're running it, you're going to do the npm install. Now I'm at the root directory. You're going to run npx playwright install. And then finally, what you're going to run is this command. This is the one that is actually going to run the test for you. And so what it's going to do is going to look over all these CSV files and run the tests. And so no hands. I'm not touching the browser at this point. But what you're going to see on the screen is Playwright actually opening up a Chrome extension or a Chrome browser, logging in with the service principal, and then checking the report to see if there's any broken visuals. The nice thing about the Power BI SDK is if a visual is broken, we actually get some error messages that come back that Playwright can hook into and figure out if those errors have occurred. And so I'm not touching the keyboard right now, and it is going through 18 different test cases. And one of the things I set it up so it's kind of running single threaded, but you can actually ratchet that up to run all these tests in parallel. The only thing I would warn you about is, like, depending on your CPU usage, like, performance may vary. You might have to put it on like maybe 2 workers or 3 workers. But what with this kind of testing, you can run through all the tests, have it running on another machine, or having this up on the screen, and you can be doing something else, which is nice, or getting yourself a cup of coffee in the morning, and let Playwright do the testing for you to make sure that there's nothing wrong in your environment. And I think this is going to go through 18 different test cases so that you can kind of see that it's running through it. But what's really nice about this is Playwright's doing the testing for you. It's going through all the bookmarks as well. And so now the tests have completed. It says 2 have failed. Now, there is this where you can click on the link to where the test has failed, but Playwright also generates a nice little report for you. I'm going to show you what that looks like. So if I was to go to Visual Studio Code, there is a little Playwright report area. And if I right click and reveal in File Explorer, I can actually click into this, double click, and it actually will generate a HTML report for you. And you can search, you can filter. So if you got a lot of tests, you can filter through these tests very quickly. And you can click on the link, and it not only will tell you what test has failed, but it will take a screenshot of that test that's failed. And what's nice about this is this gives you the URL. So if I was to go and open a new tab up and just paste the URL, this will take me directly to the page of the report that has the broken visual. And it also, if I have any that have failed that have bookmarks in them, you'll see it actually adds the bookmark GUID. So this will take you to the, if I paste that in, this will take you to the page with the bookmark turned on that shows you where that visual might be broken. And I would have to shout out Kevin sometime last year, Kevin Arnold, asked about broken visuals testing for bookmarks. So we got that worked in a couple weeks later. So thanks, Kevin, for that inspiration.
I'm just an idea guy. I can't do anything else.
All right. So pretty cool, right? Anybody think that that'd be something that they want to run on their team? Doesn't seem too complicated, but takes some time off your hands. You got a couple.
I thought it was very cool.
Amber put a little question in the chat. Is each visual considered one test?
It's each page is considered one test.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Or a bookmark on that page?
Or a bookmark on that page, or a role on that bookmark on that page. So that's the real nice thing about it, is it'll actually test each role as well.
Yeah, but when it's bringing up the page, it's looking at all of the visuals. If it finds any that are broken, right, then it reports it.
Correct. And that's the really nice thing about like having a tool that can run through, is like you can generate all the permutations and then have it run through all those permutations. It also, this tool also supports paginated reports. So you can have it generate test cases for paginated reports as well, which I know for a lot of us, if you're using paginated reports, one of the most common issues to break a paginated report is if you change some of the underlying columns that the semantic model, the DAX query that paginated is going to connect to, it breaks. You don't really notice it until somebody tries to run like a report or runs a subscription to send a PDF email that breaks. You can actually save the test cases here. And when you do save it, we have some documentation on paginated reports. There's a bit of a difference with those just because there's, Microsoft paginated reports or SSRS reports in what they were formerly called. So they actually had a different format for rendering than what Power BI reports have. But if I look at the test cases for paginated reports, we have a JSON file. So that way you can add in the parameters. So if I was to go to a report that's got a filter on it, and I want to save the test cases, that's saved. You see it actually will identify all the parameters that you can add. And we have some documentation on how you want to update those. So you can test different values or permutations of those values in the report and run the same kind of Playwright testing against the paginated reports, which is something we introduced earlier this year because we started doing more paginated reports. And lo and behold, if you change a semantic model and that DAX was specifically tailored to touch that semantic model and pull certain column names out, and they change it, it's going to break it. And paginated reports behave a little bit differently. They don't necessarily tell you there's an error until you run the report and it hits a column that might be missing or renamed. And so we had to add in a couple features to make sure that it could render that correctly. So for a lot of us, if we're trying to run these tests, we'll generate a bunch of test cases and just run that in the mornings or in the afternoons, or just run it over lunchtime and just make sure the environment's in good shape. And it saved us a lot of time because you think about how many different permutations you have with your reports. You can at least check to make sure that nothing's wrong with it, or the SQL administrator or the gateway administrator hasn't done something untowards to your environment operating correctly. All right, so just
John,
to kind of go ahead.
Before you move on, there's a couple additional questions in the chat. The first one from Fernando is, do you find this to be more useful for an administrator or a support rather than a developer?
I find it helpful as if you're running a team of Power BI developers and you're responsible for multiple semantic models, or you're a workspace administrator. That is when this is helpful, because you're going to be managing a team who's going to be making updates to the semantic model, and you're worried that you're breaking those downstream reports. This is when that tool's helpful. So you could still have that junior Power BI developer do some testing, but you teach them how to run these tests in an automated fashion, and they can move on to something more fruitful or more let's say client focused, like building a new report that's going to be more front facing to the client, or saves them time where they can learn about Fabric, spend more let's say positive outcomes instead of just kind of the manual label. For tenant admins, I don't know if that's necessarily beneficial unless you're trying to run statistics on how many broken visuals are out there. But for me, it's been either running a Power BI project or being a workspace administrator.
Got it. And then the second question comes from Amber. Could this also work for broken filters in the filter pane?
That's a good question. I would have to check that. I'm trying to think. In our cases, have I seen it fail in the filter panel? Well, I'm going to have to follow up on that one. I'm not sure that the JavaScript highlights that, but I will look into it, get you an answer.
Look at that. Amber taking my job as an idea.
I know. Now you. I can definitely see where you had a column like in a filter on a visual that you've taken away in a semantic model, and now it's broken that in the filter pane. Might have to check to see if the JavaScript SDK actually bubbles that up, but I will definitely try that out now.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep. All right. Is there any other questions, Kevin?
Nope, that's all.
So just to recap on kind of local mode visual error testing, we've got Playwright installed. We've set up the Power BI service with the service principles, and we are just generating test cases locally, and we're running the test cases using Playwright on Visual Studio Code, all in the comfort on the laptop, and running those tests. So what's really nice about this is as long as you can at least kind of show that you can run these tests automated, this kind of lays the foundation for what a lot of our teams have graduated to, which is going into what I call like continuous integration mode. So I've got these test cases. I would love it if I could just be able to run a pipeline that's just continually testing for these issues and letting me know if anything's broken without having to have somebody click the test button. And so the QR code on the screen actually walks through how to set this up in Azure DevOps. I want to cover a couple things here just so that you kind of understand what's involved. But I really recommend once you kind of get the local mode version working, is you can graduate to the CI mode. I wouldn't, unless you're an Azure DevOps kind of guru or expert, or you work with it on a regular basis, I wouldn't jump to this mode just yet. I tend to tell teams, get your footing on how to do automated testing with Playwright locally, and then you can kind of, after a couple months of having that under your belt, move on to CI mode. So some of the prerequisites you're going to need. You're going to need at least Azure DevOps. This will work in Azure DevOps Server and the Azure DevOps Service, so the cloud version. We tend to run these in Azure DevOps environment. I have had questions about running this in GitHub Actions. You can. I don't run it in production environments, so I haven't open sourced that code just yet. But I did go through the process of like testing out with ChatGPT, convert this YAML in Azure DevOps to GitHub Actions, and it did a pretty decent job on that. Was able to run it through. So you can take this and run it in GitHub Actions. You just have to change the YAML when you're running the pipeline. If you've already set up local mode, you will need the XMLA and service principles and a premium back capacity. So outside of Azure DevOps, there really isn't any new prerequisites, but Azure DevOps is something you will need. If you haven't used Azure DevOps before and you're running it in your own tenant, the first 4 licenses are free, so you can kind of run it. And the build agent that will run the tests, you can get up to, I think it's around 100 hours a month on a build agent that you can run. So you can set up a proof of concept without having to spend money, which is nice. And so what it looks like, before I kind of go into the demo mode, is you're going to run everything we're doing on the local computer. We're just going to run on a build agent, which is a container that's going to run Playwright, run the rendering the reports in the build agent, and then produce the test results as a report in Azure DevOps. So let me walk you through what that experience is like. So first things first, if you've never used Azure DevOps before, I've got a project here, and a project can contain many repositories, and repositories are where you're going to store your source code, and it can contain many pipelines. Pipelines are where you can run automated tests and deployments. And one of the things that, if you remember in the Visual Studio Code, we had that template for environment variables. Well, we need to store that somewhere securely in the Azure DevOps service. You do that in a library here. You click on library and you can create a variable group. And if I click on one I've already created, is you can store the client ID and the client secret. And the nice thing about this is any of the client secret you can store securely as well. And so once you set it, it gets encrypted. You just make sure you set the little lock button is locked, and that way it gets encrypted in the Azure DevOps service. And so you can access that securely and not worry about that client secret being open in plain text and have your security officer yell at you for exposing client secrets in plain text. All right, so once you have the variable group created, then one of the things you can do is, what I like to do is just import a repository. And so you can go out to the website here, grab that Git URL. And just like when you downloaded the zip file, you can just import this. And I'm going to call this VFW demo and hit import. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to pull down the repository for you and then save it as a repo. So that way you've got all the code already installed and ready to go in your Power BI environment. So you can see here, it added everything. And now we're at a spot where we can set up the pipeline. And what you can do is you go to like new pipeline. You can pick Azure repo, and I'm going to go to DFW demo. And I want to click existing Azure pipelines. So the templates that I provide you are actually already in that repository. And you can pick, let's see if I pick main. There's a couple that you can pick here. So the one I would recommend if you're using your Azure DevOps service, so the cloud version, is you can use a Docker template. One of the nice things about Playwright that Microsoft has provided is they give you a pre-built Linux build agent that has Playwright installed already and some of the prerequisites installed. And so that way when the build agent runs, instead of having to install Playwright, do a full install, it's already ready to go. And so you can run your test pretty quickly. If you are running this in a server environment where it's like on-prem, I'd recommend using something like this one, which is more tailored towards running the npx install and having that build agent going. So if you pick that Docker template, you hit continue, and you can see here, it's going to reference that variable group. I've got it scheduled to run every 6 hours. You can change this if you, this little cron, what I always recommend is go to ChatGPT and ask it, build a cron on how often you want it to run, or every other day. It will give you a decent example. And then you can tell which branch you want it to run on. I usually keep it on main because we're running tests. And then you'll notice here, this is the container that we're going to run the build agent on. So it's going to run on Linux, and it's going to run using this container to do that. And then down here near the bottom, it's going to, that npx playwright test, that's what it's running. And then it references a config file. Now, config file tells Playwright how to run this in a Azure DevOps environment. And then once it's done, it says, all right, publish the test results. And so when this config file is getting executed, it knows that it needs to publish the test results in a certain format that's compatible with Azure DevOps in order to see the results in Azure DevOps. And then one last thing, if you've ever working with secure variables in a variable group, you need to reference it in the environment. I've done that already for you, but this is one of those common errors you'll run into where it's like it can't access the secure variable. You have to reference it specifically in the steps. And so once you've got that set up, you can run the pipeline. But before you run the pipeline, you need tests. And if I was to go back to that repository here, you got a test case folder, and I can go into main here and go to test cases, and I can, if I go to upload file, I can actually, I should be disabled. Where's my upload? Upload file, and I can drag any of those test cases that I built early on. So I've got my tests cases, and I could drag that over and hit commit. So if you want to generate different test cases, you can just add this to the repository. And then when the container runs, so this is running every 6 hours, it will tell you if you have any test cases have failed. Now, the nice thing by default, if you're working in this project and you created the project, you will get an email saying that this pipeline has failed. And it'll give you a link to this build, and you can actually check out the tests. And so in this case, I got this one test that's failed, and I click into it. I can look at the attachments. I can actually download the file and take a look at the error. I can also just click the link. It'll take me to the, usually it'll show me where the URL is. Somewhere around here. Forgot where that shows up. I don't know why the attachment doesn't want to render right now, just because I'm trying to demo it. But normally it shows up here. But at least you'll get an idea of what's failed and where you need to take a look at. And this can happen offline, so you don't need to rely on somebody's computer to be running these tests. And this will run continually every 6 hours and give you a notice. And if you were to check one of my blog articles, actually, you can write a Power BI report that looks at a pipeline and can tell you if your Azure DevOps pipelines are failing. So you can build a dashboard off of this to see if any tests are failing, if you're worried about missing that critical email. So for a lot of our production environments, what we'll do is we'll build our test cases and using the tool and put those in our repository. And those, once we move stuff to production, or we're working with a customer who's got a bunch of reports, we'll generate those test cases and just have those running every 6, 3, 1 hour. It's up to you, and double check that all the reports are running without any broken visuals. So I'll stop there to see if there's any questions on the pipeline aspect. Is anybody confused? Anybody working with Azure DevOps? I'm actually, I know a lot of the times where we're going over this, Azure DevOps may be a new feature for somebody. Yes, Andrew. Oh, just raising hands. So yeah, okay. So there's some of you using Azure DevOps.
And we have no questions on chat.
Okay. So what's nice about this is this not only will run the tests for you, but it also keeps statistics. And so you can see up on the screen here that we've got, let's see, if I open up the summary again, we've got statistics on what's passing and failing. And those test results also get stored here in the runs area where you can see all the test results over time. And in some of the environments I've worked in is there's a way in the Azure DevOps API that you can extract this information. And we'll use this to kind of showcase or run analytics on how well we're doing or how well our environment is operating and having broken visuals show up. And so this is a good way of kind of empirically showing how well you're, not only as an organization, you're running tests on your reports, but also highlighting any systemic issues that you need to solve empirically. So if you need to convince somebody like, hey, we need to start introducing maybe some more peer reviews or some ways to look at semantic models before we move to production because we're breaking a lot of visuals, or the SQL administrator's taking that gateway down a lot, we're seeing these issues crop up, you've got some sort of history and analytics that you can showcase to it. And there's nothing, I would say, more impactful. If, instead of doing finger pointing at folks and saying, hey, you're causing the issue, just say, hey, we've run some statistics. We're running this, and at 7 o'clock every Tuesday, we're getting a bunch of broken visuals because we suspect you're doing maintenance on this, and here's the data. Could we work out a way to maybe avoid that problem in the future? And so those statistics help. All right. So, cool thing, and this is in preview now, but one of the limiting factors that you will run into if you're running this in Azure DevOps is you can really only run like 2 threads at a time. So if you got a bunch of tests, they kind of get queued up, and you got to wait for these other tests to finish. Well, Microsoft recently kind of rebranded a suite of tools, and they call it now Azure App Testing. And as part of their Azure App Testing, they've got this thing called Playwright Workspaces. And so what Playwright Workspaces allows you to do is leverage kind of a horizontal scaling capability so that instead of maybe running 1 or 2 workers to run the tests on all your reports, you can run 20. And it's a pay-as-you-go. So you're only going to pay for the amount of time that the tests are running in the Playwright workspace. And so what's nice about this, and again, it's still in preview, so what I'm going to show you now, the UI may change. I can tell you 2 months ago, the UI was different. But you can, if you create an Azure app testing and you create a Playwright workspace, this will actually walk you through on setting up access management. You can create a service token to access the Playwright testing tool. It will actually give you all your test runs, which isn't necessarily helpful in terms of getting the test results, but it walks you through how to update Playwright. And I've got a in the demo example here, we've got a YAML file that we'll be sharing here. I just want to make sure it's actually working consistently over the next couple months. But what it is doing is it's using our Playwright testing group services. And so if I was to go to the library here and go to Playwright testing services, there's 2 new environmental variables here. You get a URL that you can run the Playwright against, and you get an access token. And when this runs, it'll actually scale out and run the tests at scale. one of the things you'll want to keep in mind, you'll notice that this is running in East US. When you create your Playwright testing service, you want to keep it in a region that's close to your Power BI tenant and more than likely close to your Azure DevOps tenant, because there's some network traffic going back and forth. So you're going to want to reduce latency there. But with those two variables added, when you run your pipeline here, this can run on Ubuntu, so running pretty fast. It does the Playwright install and will run Playwright and produce the test results the same way that we did it in the container mode, but just some preliminary testing. If I scale this out to like 20 workers, this can run a lot quicker. You can also tell it how much you want to ramp up or ramp down, and then the Playwright testing service will actually kind of figure out how many max concurrent sessions it needs to run. So when this runs, it will show you how many workers it used, how long it took to run, test minutes that consumed, because this is what you end up paying for, and it's really just pennies. It tells you what branch you ran that against. So if you're running different test cases and you're trying to figure out what caused those tests to run and when, you can take a look at that. But this is kind of Microsoft's foray into building scalable Playwright testing. And we're starting to explore on how we can leverage this to kind of scale out our testing. Because right now, if we're running like 50 to 100 tests, it can take several minutes for it to complete. Whereas if we can run this in a shorter time span, it reduces the amount of time that those build agents are spending running the tests, which means that those build agents are available to be doing other things. So pretty cool stuff. It's again in preview. I'm hoping over the next couple of months, maybe this will move into GA as it's being rebranded. It's been out for about 16 months, 16, 18 months, this service. But it's been pretty exciting to see how it's matured, and the ability to run these tests at scale has been kind of nice. You can also, not only can you run this in Azure DevOps and have it run against the Playwright service, you can also have this run locally, and you can have your tests, you just change the config file that you point it to. So you can actually have it, when you do npm test, you can have it run, push all the work up on the Playwright workspace. So if you're worried about your CPU just getting hammered, you can actually push a lot of the work upstream, which is really nice as well.
John, it looks like we have a hand raised.
Yeah.
It's me, John, Kevin. I was being nice, just trying to wait for a part, but yeah, you have you given thought about running this against reports that you have on, say, that a direct lake model, right, that is out of fabric capacity? And the worry that I would get here is just what you brought up, like scaling this up to get through faster. You scale it up and you could potentially cause spikes, right? Big time spikes. I'll give an example. Like we flood our capacity because they want to email out PDFs. And so the subscriptions all run around the same time, right? And I would imagine this could cause a very similar problem.
It could, and that's why we've been kind of my first use case of this was actually doing some load testing on a report. You can scale it out to like hit one report 50 times if you wanted to. But you definitely saw the capacity metrics go real up. So my recommendation is, if you're doing some of that testing, make sure that your test and production environments are running different capacities.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to figure out if scaling out the testing works, that worker number is, just do it in the test environment and so that you're not breaking production. I haven't, when I had that issue with the load testing, that was on a smaller capacity. I would imagine if you're running like, bigger capacities and you're only running 20 workers hitting a report, that shouldn't have too much of a hit. But if you decide that, hey, I want to run 300 different test cases and run 100 threads and just hammer that production capacity, you could DDoS yourself just and not be aware of it. But
Yeah,
that's
I agree.
that's a classic issue you're going to run in any sort of load testing and app testing environment. You can see that they've got Azure load testing here as well for Azure functions and logic apps and those kind of things. It's something you got to be aware of. Definitely.
Yeah, because what I was also thinking is like, if all of a sudden you hit that limit and you hit throttling, the Playwright's just going to continue to push through it, but just keep
Yep.
reporting broken visuals because you're going to get broken visuals because you're throttled.
Yep, exactly. That's true. And so you'll be putting money in the Microsoft jar for Fabric, and you'll be putting some money in the Playwright jar for testing.
Woohoo!
Maybe Microsoft doesn't mind that though. But your client will. That answer your question, Kevin?
Yeah, it was. I figured I had it in my head already. I just wanted to have the discussion, so it was.
Yeah,
great.
there's definitely a great power on this one. This is something I'm testing out, and I haven't pushed out any of the YAML files yet because it's still in preview, and I also want to make sure it's like I don't push out some instructions that first couple people use it and they're like, hey, you took down our capacity running these tests. Like, ooh. All right. Well, that's all I have. The QR code that takes you to the slides today, which also have QR codes, which take you to the GitHub repository. This is open source, so if you're interested in contributing, I am more than happy. If you want to break out some TypeScript, I am always interested in contributions. If you feel that the instructions weren't helpful, let me know and we can update those. But we try to be pretty comprehensive on how to set this up, and hopefully you find this helpful in avoiding broken visuals reaching production, or at least in a small part catching them before anybody else does.
Very good. Very good. Anybody have any other questions for John? Or just applause? I mean, what I find amazing, John, I've seen this a few times. And it's been a bit since I've seen it, and you continuously make it easier and easier to get into each time. And so you keep putting a lot of work into this, maintaining it. You and your team, I think you have a team behind you that helps you do it and everything. So it's a great resource for the community. Appreciate it.
Well, we're hoping it helps. Obviously we're going to be looking at the filter pane. Got that on the to-do list for the backlog. But we're also working on, with the introduction of PBIR, we're looking at ways that would generate the test cases on commit as well. So stay tuned on that one. So we're trying to get it so you don't necessarily have to use the tool to generate test cases. You can actually have it generate when you commit it on a branch. So we've got a PowerShell library that's doing some of that, but we're trying to work in the PBIR capacity in order to anticipate when PBIP goes generally available, which I think was at FabCon in Las Vegas. There was an announcement that they were hoping sometime at the end of this year that it would.
And I think they've worked through their final issues, right? I think the limitations have been taken off the documentation page from the last time I looked. So yeah, I was about ready to start looking into it again because that's going to open up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I mean, you can, I can tell you it's easier to parse bookmarks out of those smaller JSON files.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easier to pull out the RLS and OLS data in the Tyndall files. So stay tuned. We're trying to make sure that it gets easier to generate test cases where you could just have it based on commits, do some tests, or at least help you build those test cases so that even on a PR, it could check Playwright for you.
And
Be
John,
pretty cool.
speaking of the test cases, when you're generating them, what is the output in those CSVs? Is it just basically one line per report?
Yes, it is. And we kind of made a decision to do CSVs just because it was easier for folks to tweak the CSVs as well, because you can kind of open this up in Excel, make some changes, and then save it back if you needed to make, or even remove a line. So I know some folks are like, hey, I don't need to test this page, just avoid it. You can do that as well.
Okay, so ultimately what you're doing is you're going and attempting to render the report, and then you're scanning to see if there's an error that you can hook onto and report it.
Yeah, great questions. Do we still got a little time?
Yeah, we don't have to end right at the top of the hour, and it's fine.
Well, I can show you. This is the JavaScript that's actually the TypeScript that runs. So it gets the test cases here. So it's reading all the CSV files. So it's going to read all the test cases first here. And then it gets the access token. So this is verifying that it can actually, like the service principal can authenticate. And when for each test case, so each row in that CSV file, it will make sure that it can generate a report embed token. And so one of the first things I'll check to see is like, can that service principal access that report or that page? And if it can, we're good. And then if it does that, it will also go through and right here, this will create a browser, a headless browser in Chrome, and then build using the Power BI JavaScript here. It builds an HTML page that embeds the report. And so this get embed report, this is all the report information. That's the ID, the page, the embed URL, the embed token, which is what you get in the prior, and then the endpoints. So that tells you what the API endpoint is. And then this is the thing that actually renders the report. So it's using that Power BI client. And then we hook into, if that errors on the embed, it listens, it has an event listener on the JavaScript. So if it errors, then that error event is an indication that a visual on that page or that bookmark has errored. And then we highlight that as an issue. Otherwise, if it gets the event for rendered, that means there was no errors in rendering that that bookmark or that paged report. And then we just check to see if it rendered or errored. And if it didn't, then it didn't error, it passed. Otherwise, it failed. And then it writes out the information. So that's the secret sauce right there, is just hooking into the Power BI's event listener.
Okay, so in the event of like there being an issue with the model not being refreshed or something like that, then you should be able to expect that it's all going to error out.
Well, the model is separate from the report. So if the model refreshed and the report is fine, none of the columns have issues, there's no other kind of extenuating circumstances like it can't access the model, then the report will render fine. But if, like, let's say you change the column name and you publish the report, hit refresh, and that report then tries to access a column name that no longer exists, then if this test is running, the visual will have broken and will flag that as an issue.
Okay, so it's not necessarily, doesn't care much about empty visuals, it's just actual gray boxes.
Yeah, for empty visuals, that's when I would recommend like another pattern like we use calls it like the DAX query view testing pattern, where on refresh, like we'll have a job that just runs a bunch of DAX tests to make sure that like are the tables hydrated, like does it have enough records in it, do all the dimension tables have records, those kind of like after refresh health checks. Be nice if you can do it all in one spot.
Right, those stack really well.
Yeah. So, and then paginated reports operate almost the same way. And this I got to give credit to Playwright. If an error occurs in a paginated report, it doesn't trigger the error in the JavaScript, which is something I've asked Microsoft about. I haven't heard that they're going to fix it, but there is a modal that pops up, and Playwright is awesome enough that it will hook in and identify if that modal appears. And so we can actually look for a specific modal to appear, this content MS dialog, and then there's this text, and you can actually see if that modal is valid or has an error in it, and then error the paginated report, which I wish there was a better way to do it, but thankfully Playwright helped me on that one. And that was fairly straightforward looking once I figured out that Playwright can actually hook into modals.
That's nice. So if I'm reading between the lines here, you could also use that same functionality, just going against straight up SSRS.
If you could, yes, you could. You'd have to write the URLs a little bit differently, but this would give you a good starting point. Because I believe like the API, or at least rendering the report, would be pretty similar, and you'd still see the JavaScript coming back. It might be a little bit different, but you could still look for them. The HTML should be pretty similar.
Awesome.
Yeah, the first thing I would check there is, can a service principal be a consumer on an SSRS report portal? Never had to try it, so I'm not sure if you could add service principals. I've never seen anybody talk about, put a service principal to read your SSRS report, right? So
that's true.
And this, I mean, the Playwright, we helped we made sure we open source this, because this, we would hope that gives you some idea here. If you look at the code, not only can you test for broken visuals, but let's say you want to automate some of the interaction or testing interactions, you can write the TypeScript to like interact with buttons and that, which is pretty cool. So with the JavaScript API that Microsoft provides, you can have it like click on that report, click on that visual, and you can do more end-to-end testing as well. I mean, the visual error testing was something like common, but we've been looking at ways that like, hey, is there ways that we can automate it where click the drop-down menu here, does this show? Is this hidden? Those kind of things would be nice as well. A lot of those manual UI test that you would go through. Playwright, to an extent, can automate some of that as well.
All right. And anything else from anyone in the chat? Give him a second.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. So that seems to be stopped now. Anything that anybody want to ask that's not on the recording?